Hello and welcome to the webinar on AnyLogic Private Cloud, enabling enterprise scale simulation deployment. My name is Arash Mahdavi and I'm your host today. Today, we are thrilled to have Jeffrey Wirtz as our guest speaker. Jeff Wirtz is the program support specialist at the AnyLogic company. Aside from helping AnyLogic users with simulation-related questions, Jeff's main focus has been on AnyLogic cloud architecture, deployment, and support. He's the main point of contact in helping our enterprise customers maintaining their private cloud. Jeff has a bachelor's degree in computer science from DePaul University. Before I get to the agenda, let me clarify that throughout this webinar, we are going to use the terms AnyLogic Private Cloud and Model Manager interchangeably. So in this webinar, we'll start by an overview of the Model Manager. Then we'll talk about how to export a model to the Model Manager, how we can run models in this Model Manager, how we can set up and configure experiments here. Then we'll talk about application programming interface or APIs of this Model Manager. We'll talk about the overview and different administrative capabilities that you have. And then we'll review everything that we talked about, and we talk about some use cases. And at the end, Jeff and I will come back to answer your questions. But before we get to the main part of the webinar, let me clarify some of the ideas behind this ecosystem. If we look back into the past and look into conventional simulation models, majority of them are strategic simulations, tactical, or rarely operational level models. The output of these conventional or legacy simulations are static reports, plans, or to-do lists with minimal interaction between the actual users and the simulation models themselves. In contrast, we believe simulation modeling is moving from this isolated solution to an integrated part of the digital enterprise. In conjunction with digitized data sources, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, optimization, and simulation are key components of the insight generation ecosystem at the enterprise level. This living ecosystem provides an up-to-date and interactive insights to a large number of enterprise stakeholders. In contrast to the previous slide, when we talked about conventional simulation models and how their output is just static reports. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper into the enterprise simulation, which was part of that digital enterprise. What we call enterprise simulation is a set of deployable or deployed simulation models that are likely to be at operational level and accessible by a large number of stakeholders. In other words, aside from the fact that these enterprise simulation models are operational level, they are accessible by a large number of people, meaning that being able to deploy them and giving access to a large number of stakeholders is a key factor. As a subset of enterprise simulation, we see that it is very likely for these type of models to comprise of many heterogeneous models with common underlying behavior that usually are associated with geographically distributed business units. As an example, you can imagine a restaurant chain with different restaurants at different locations, or let's say, or imagine an e-commerce business with different fulfillment centers, or a supply chain with different distribution centers. There are different units at different locations that are different from each other, but at the same time, there are some commonality between these units. This is not a required characteristic for this type of simulation models, but we've seen it as a very common attribute. Okay, so let's take a look into the entire ecosystem before we dive into the model manager. So on the left side, we have AnyLogic Model Editor, which is AnyLogic development environment that we are all familiar with and we install on our desktops. This is the version, this is the editor that is used by all the modelers to create and edit the models. On the center, we are looking at the AnyLogic Model Manager or AnyLogic Private Cloud. And this is a platform for execution and deployment of your models. And on the right side are the end users that just need a browser to get access to the models that are uploaded to the model manager. In this webinar, we are going to focus on how AnyLogic modelers can upload the models that they built in the model editor or AnyLogic desktop to the model manager, and then create an experiment to run themselves and share with a large number of users who want to use these models as a way to make decisions. So I know that Jeff has a lot of interesting topics to talk about. So without further ado, let's hear from Jeff.
Thank you for the introduction, Arash. Here I've pulled up the gallery view of a model manager that's installed on premises on one of our servers. Here you can view all the models that I have uploaded and other models uploaded by my team members. If I click on one of these models, we'd be brought to the model page where we can see the name, categories, short description, and the different experiments that we have created. We'll be covering all of these experiments as well as these different tabs later on in the webinar. If I click on the play button here, a new window will pop up that shows an instance of the model running with animation. It's a very similar window as you would see if you're running it locally from the AnyLogic software. So going back to the gallery view of all the models, you could see how we have separated them by different categories. And I can also order them by runs, rating, or the most recently created model, or the most recently uploaded model. If I want to search through different models, I can either look up the name or search by tag in the search window, or I can look under the different categories. So now that we've taken a look at the gallery view, let's go back into the model page itself. We've already seen the model run with animation, but now let's actually take a look at these experiments that I showed earlier. Starting off with this one, you could consider this experiment, which is a regular simulation, as a base case. Here, I have different inputs with the model that I'm able to change. As you can see, this experiment has not yet been run, so I'm going to hit the run button. What this does is it will take those inputs and run the simulation as fast as it can with no animation. And now you could see a view of all the outputs in data analytics that we have pre-configured for this experiment. So on the experiment page, here's an overview of all of the different UI capabilities. Here we can view all of the experiments, the different model versions. We're able to create new experiments, change any of the input values, and navigate to the output section as well. If you look to the top right, you can also see that we can run the experiment with no animation. We can also run one of the experiments with an interactive animation. And any changes we might make to the inputs, we can either discard or we can compare experiments side by side. We also have the ability to export the model information to Excel, but I'll be covering that in further detail. Now that we've seen a running model, let's take a look at how I prepare this for uploading to the cloud. So here we have the Trauma Center model pulled up inside the AnyLogic environment. And to prepare it to upload it for the cloud, we first have to set up its run configuration. In every AnyLogic model, you will have this object called run configuration in the name of your top level agent. If I select this, you can see that it extracts all of the inputs or parameters of your model, as well as all of the outputs or objects from the analysis library. You can also include files such as text or Excel files, which we'll be covering in further detail later on. So here for this model, the experiment that we care about is making decision on the opening hour and closing hour of our express care department. And what we care about analyzing is things such as the length of stay, utilization of resources, and the average time that they're in the system. I am very easily able to add more, give labels to, or remove any of these objects as I so please. Now that we have this set up, let's actually upload it. So here I click Export Model to AnyLogic Cloud. And here I've already made a connection to the private cloud instance. And I'm going to create a new model from scratch, give it a meaningful name, an icon. I'm going to decide whether or not I want to include the source files, or if I want this model to be publicly available across the entire model manager. For now, I'm going to unclick this box. We could then see all the files will be uploading and click Finish. So after I've uploaded the model, I'm now taken to the model page. Here I could define other things like the model name, different categories, application areas, any methods that I want to include, and maybe type in more in the description. Going back to the other tabs, I can also go to versions, where here you can see I've uploaded different versions of the model that I can either delete or download. And I can also see who's the one who uploaded it. So here I can invite other cloud users and delegate their access, whether it be a developer or a user. I can view the other current members who have current model access. I can provide direct link access. And I can also publish this such that all members of my team can view the model as well. Here we have the custom UI tab that I'll be demonstrating further in detail later on. Here's also the comments tab where either I can leave a comment or view any comments that other cloud users have left. So we've seen the model run in a base case scenario, but let's set up a few more experiments. So if I click on New Experiment, here I can specify different experiment types, another base simulation, Monte Carlo experiments, but in this case, I'm going to do variation with replications. And I need to give it some meaningful name and add it to the model. Before we run it, we have a few more steps on the configuration side. So if I go into the dashboard editor, you can now see a new option for all my inputs. No longer just slider edit box, but we're going to set these to varied in range. We're also going to leave the number of replications as an edit box and save our dashboard. Here you can see we're no longer running just one scenario, but we're going to try a combination of different inputs. I'm going to click Run. And we'll see multiple experiments have now been created and are running concurrently. So for the sake of time, I will now be transitioning to a more completed version of this model that has all of its output sections set up ahead of time. So here we have that same variation model, but with outputs already set up and configured. Here we have two sections of box plots that show the average length of stay over the different opening and closing hours. We can also view this data in different types of objects. Here we have a 3D plot that maps out the opening and closing hours of a specific department and the effect that it has of the patient's average time through the system. Now that we've seen a variation experiment, it's very common that we might find more than one scenario that we want to examine. Specifically, I have found two that I want to compare side by side. What I have done is created new experiments and named them Scenario A and Scenario B. If I navigate to the top right, I click the Compare button. and I select the two scenarios. The UI assigns a color by default to each of the scenarios for easy comparison and contrast. And now you could see all of the outputs from the different scenarios and their differences. And I want to highlight that in certain instances, such as chart, the data might be overlapping and it will actually combine the colors together. Inputs and outputs are very significant in many simulation experiments, and we're going to demonstrate how we can manage the different options in the model manager. So starting off is with file as input. When you're setting up your models inside the run configuration, you can also add any type of resources to your models as well. These can be used to read parameter values, used to configure models. You can even create parameterized agent populations, or maybe you just want to import data from an Excel spreadsheet or any other files to be in a readily available form. These are all going to be defined through the run configuration, and almost any file type is supported, including zip archives. Whenever you add these objects inside of the run configuration, the experiment dashboard will now change to a file input object. When uploading these files, you will notice in the dashboard that the input will be changed to a file selection object that will be demonstrating in just a few moments. Similarly, you can also set up these files as a type of output to the model as well. You may want to download these files that are created during the model run to create custom Excel spreadsheets. You can also do things like create execution logs of your simulation model, or you can generate JSON files to use in other applications. Similar to file as output, this is something that is defined inside of the run configuration, and any file types are supported. And currently, this is only supported for single run experiments only. So now that we've discussed this, let's actually take a look at a demonstration of this capability. So here we have a supply chain model where all the locations of our facilities are being created through these Excel files. If I hit play, you could see the current layout of all these places that are loaded from those Excel files. If I want to reference a new file, I can easily drag and drop a new one to replace. You will see that the experiment has not been run yet. We will now be able to see the outputs based on the updated Excel spreadsheet. And for further brevity, let's actually take a look at this model running with animation. And we can now see we have added an extra location. So whenever this model actually finishes running, we have done two things for the output section. First, we have set up this model's Excel spreadsheet. This is an object that was configured locally inside the AnyLogic development environment, such that when the model runs, it records many of these output values to this local Excel spreadsheet. In here, we can see the outputs of the experiment have been recorded to this Excel file. Built into the model manager is the ability to export your data as either an Excel spreadsheet or as a JSON file. The Excel spreadsheet will contain many sheets that discuss things like model version, the inputs, and all the outputs. The JSON file contains data about all the inputs and all the outputs in a raw JSON format. Built into every uploaded model on the model manager, I'm able to download the results as an Excel file or a JSON file. In this case, let's download it as an Excel file for a single run experiment. Once it is finished downloading, you will see all the different sheets for the model version, inputs, all the outputs, and any of the analysis objects that I add as well. Another option for setting up input and output for the model manager can include things such as a remote connection to an external database. These databases can include things such as an SQL server that's hosted through a site such as AWS, Azure, or maybe even on premises. You can also connect to external files that are accessed from inside the model as it's running on the manager. And both of these connection types can be used for inputs and outputs. I've already demonstrated the default UI of the model manager, but another option is that you can consider the model manager as a wrapper around the model, providing multiple APIs. This includes JavaScript API, which can normally be used for custom and branded web interface. You can also access it through Java API that could be called upon inside of your analytical workflow or connect to other databases or any custom BI you may have. You also have access to Python API that could typically be used in the previous two cases, but can also be used to incorporate artificial intelligence, such as generating large data sets for machine learning. Now we'll show a demonstration of these APIs and their capabilities. Before we dive into those, we're going to take a look at the API documentation. Here is the publicly available documentation of all of the API available in the model manager. You can view a full documentation of all the libraries and their different attributes, as well as some examples, both in HTML, JavaScript, Python, and base Java. You could spend much time looking into this documentation for some examples yourself, but let's demonstrate a few of them. The first example I'll be pulling up is a relatively basic JavaScript API web page that includes some buttons for running the animation and changing the parameters while it's running. So first, we're going to run it. And as you can see, inside this web page, it opens the model window of the running animation. And here, I can change the slider and run a new type of experiment. I can also at any point decide to just reset my parameter to its default value. So here in this example, I've created a simple Python function that programmatically creates a parameter variation experiment and reads out the outputs. So here I can run this program, and after it runs, what the code does is it will create experiments to be run inside the cloud. Once the model finishes running on the model manager, it prints out the parameter and what the average time in system was. So now that we've looked at some API examples, let's actually examine the code itself. So in this Python, first thing we want to do is import the AnyLogic Cloud client libraries. These are what actually gives you access to those model manager APIs. The next thing we want to do is actually connect to the model manager itself. We need to establish who's connecting, the model we want to connect to, the experiment we're going to connect to. In the next line, we then set the range of the inputs we want for a parameter variation and the number of replications. So now that we've created this experiment, the next thing we want to do is query the outputs by creating this outputs object and referencing the previously created experiment and getting all their outputs and formatting them accordingly to a string. Once we have those values, we set a simple loop function that ranges over all the different experiments we created, and we print their input and output values accordingly. And let's run this one more time for demonstration. So now we can see we've finished the parameter variation. Here's every input and their respective outputs. So now that we've looked at some examples of the API, the next thing I want to discuss is how we can implement it into the model manager. In terms of custom and branded web UI of the model manager, this example is going to be showing an individual model's UI, whereas later on, I will be discussing in the admin panel how we can brand the entirety of our model manager. So now let's take a look at another model uploaded to the manager. So here we have this transporters moving in free space model that is a material handling model with inputs for different workstations and different AGV fleets and their appropriate outputs. Here we can see that this is a material handling model of a production plant that utilizes AGVs. In this experiment, the thing we care about most are going to be the AGVs. So what we want to do, as opposed to this experimentation environment, is create a custom UI. When you navigate to the model page, every model has this custom UI that I previously mentioned. With this, you can actually archive a website directory and upload it to the model manager via a zip file. Let's transition to a completed version of this model. So if I go under the My Models, go back to this model page, you'll see that I've uploaded a new UI. I've created link access, and I've redirected anyone who tries to access this model through the gallery to be redirected to this UI. So now let's actually take a look at it running. So now that I'm modeled as a guest user, anytime I try to access the custom UI example, I'll be redirected to the custom UI that we have created. Here I can play with different inputs and parameters, and programmatically decide to run a model with animation and include all types of model control buttons and charts that are created through JavaScript to query the live running model. I can also create other types of experiments such as parameter variation, even create different types of plots such as a 3D plot, and even download the results as an external file. So within your private model manager, you are given access to the administrator panel. Within this panel, you're able to get a quick overview of the status of your cloud, all of your users, customized web branding, an overview of all these services, running model tasks, and different nodes that we may be connected to. On the status page, we can view things like support and build date. And if there are any errors occurring behind the scenes, it generates a report of where it is occurring from. Here on the Users tab, we're able to have an overview of all of the users that have created accounts. As the administrator, I have the ability to create users myself, where I can set their user type and define all of the user attributes. Also, with any of the already generated users, I can easily access them and edit any of their information. Also, If for any reasons I need to directly communicate them, I could send them a message. And in case that we have any users leave the company or we need to get rid of anyone, we can select a user and delete them. So here on the customization tab, I'm able to change the branding of the website. This includes changing things like the logo marks, logo types, and favicons. And you can view the differences across each of the pages. Also, you're able to change the theme-based color of your model manager to either any of the pre-configured colors or to a custom color of your choice. Here we can apply the changes. And now this view will be shown to all users who access this model manager. On the last tab, we can view all the services, which are all the different components that make up your model manager. In here, we can view a log if we have any issues or errors that may be occurring. Also, we're able to easily select one of these objects and restart the service or even reload the image as well. The next tab is the running tasks. Here, we can see an overview of any single run simulations done inside an executor node, or any multi-run experiments such as parameter variation or Monte Carlo. Now let's take a look at this tab while a model is running. So I'm going to choose that trauma center model we ran earlier and run it with animation. While this model is running, let's navigate back to the administrator panel. Now you can see that I have an animation model with a given task ID, a model version. Here, I have the model ID that I can click on, and it will take me to the exact model that's running. And I can also click on the user ID to find out who's running it. So on the Nodes tab, before we discuss this, I want to give a little bit of context to the model manager itself. So far, we've just shown an example of what a single running task looked like. But in your model manager, you might have dozens or hundreds of users that are all trying to access this server at the same time and running multiple models. Here on the Nodes page, we may have decided to not just have a single machine that our model manager is installed on, but we have distributed the execution or the running of models across multiple executor nodes. And once we've connected all of these nodes together, here on the Nodes page, we would see a list of all of our execution nodes. So I've previously demonstrated how we can manage users of our model manager through the admin panel in the default UI. But many large companies have much more strict security requirements for this user management. And within model managers, you can have system administrators that can set up integration with either Active Directory or LDAP servers, allowing your administrators to manage all of your model manager users from this Active Directory that will then synchronize within your model manager environment, such that the login information and all of the profiles will have their info all synchronized with your directory. For LDAP and Active Directory, we have tested many different types of services. This includes things like Open LDAP, Sun Directory Server, and even Azure Active Directory. In conclusion, let's discuss everything that I've demonstrated throughout this webinar and all of the capabilities of Model Manager that allows for enterprise simulation. So Model Manager is a convenient and secure central repository for storing your data-sensitive models You can control who has access to the environment and also can control the level of visibility of individual models. It also gives you online model-driven solutions that use simulation models as a backend for any custom web-based applications, or maybe any enterprise decision support systems, or even as an input to a data visualization platform. We've also shown off the extensive API that allows for programmatic experiments and interactivity with models, and this includes the built-in JavaScript, Java, Python APIs, and the generic REST endpoints that are also provided for custom implementation in other languages. You can easily share your models with your coworkers, managers, or even external users. This also gives you a centralized runtime environment and powerhouse. So instead of upgrading hardware of all the development laptops, Model Manager offers a centralized and powerful server-based runtime environment. We've also shown how you can build single or multi-run experiments within your web browser and even set up customizable dashboards with built-in dynamic graphs. With the ability of extracting data from Model Manager, you can also rapidly gather large data sets from simulation model outputs to maybe train your machine learning models. As we've demonstrated today's webinar, using Model Manager is easy. You can install Model Manager on any desired server, whether this be on premises on a physical machine, or maybe through a preferred platform of your choice. This can include Amazon Web Service, Google Cloud Platform, or Microsoft Azure. And as you've seen, this environment has an intuitive UI that can be mastered in less than an hour. And even within a couple of clicks, your existing AnyLogic models are now ready to be uploaded. And you can have complex experiments that could be built and run within minutes. As part of the support for Model Manager, we also provide frequent and well-documented updates and maintenance procedures. They're provided as the offering to keep your platform up to date, as well as keeping all of your models safe and secure. Thank you so much for your time. And now I'll be joining Arash to answer all of your questions you may have.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you, Jeff, for this very informative webinar. So we have a pretty good list of questions, and some of your questions are already answered in the Q&A box. But if we feel that some of those questions that are answered privately worth to be shared with the rest of the attendees, we will put it in the follow-up material. So to make sure you get all the best information that we have today with you. So let's go through the question, Jeff. And I will chime in if there is anything that I can add to it. So the first one, what is the difference between AnyLogic Cloud and Model Manager? So it's an easy one.
There actually is no difference.
Okay. Yeah, and we decided to make sure that it is clear. So Model Manager is a more declarative, clear name, so we can refer to it. It's easier to understand. So is there any limitation on the number of people that can use the Model Manager?
No, there's no limitation on the number of users for Model Manager, and you actually have the ability to scale your environment appropriately, such that you have more users added, scale the environment up.
Perfect. Okay, so a couple of questions about the API access, I guess. Can I get API access to a specific model, or is it to the whole Model Manager?
Thank you. That's actually a really good question. So this API access is all done through an API key. This API key is connected to a specific account. And how this works is that this key will give access to all of the upload models from that specified account. So my API key, I can access all of the models I've uploaded and any models that have been shared with me and given developer privileges.
Okay, thank you. Can I connect my own visualization tools like Tableau or RShiny with the model manager?
Yes. With the use of the APIs, you can connect from any third-party software to interact and connect with the uploaded models.
And if I remember correctly, so we have several customers that are already doing this because these visualization tools are pretty common and standard in corporate. So they prefer to have this standard visualization tools on top of any decision-making tools or data-centric models, or simulation models could be another way of visualizing data. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky to read. I hope that I'm doing a good job in conveying the question to you. Does it matter which agent the output or variable charts live in order to be seen in the cloud? So let me reiterate my understanding. I think the question is how Model Manager extracts the outputs that it wants to show from the AnyLogic model. Does those data sets and charts need to be in the top level agent on the main, or they could be anywhere in the model?
Thank you. That's a great question. So the short is that the run configuration will extract all of those objects that are found inside of the analysis library that are residing in the top level agent. Now this top level agent could be main or some other specified name that you give it. But once again, it's only going to be extracting from the top level agent.
Makes sense. And this is kind of in the same kind of standard way that AnyLogic works in all the regular experiments, other experiments that you build. It extracts the parameters that are in the main, in the top level agent, or main, which is most of the case. The default, people don't change the name of the main to anything else. Okay, so let's see what else we have. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Can I use the API access to build a fully customized website? So I think you already demonstrated this question, but the follow-up is actually interesting. Maybe even create a mobile app. Is it possible to do that?
Yes. So much of what was demonstrated in the webinar was the built-in UI of the model manager itself. But with the API access, it actually opens up a whole lot of possibilities where you can use this model manager as a back-end runtime environment, such that inside, let's use this mobile app example, inside your mobile app, when you're entering in data and getting results, it's connecting to that cloud and then giving back the results. So yeah, it's API really opens up a lot.
Okay, perfect. Can users be from a company? I'm reiterating the question. Basically, the question is asking it's obvious that people who are working for the same company, the same team, can access to it. It's these model managers installed on an on-premise server or a cloud provider that works with the company. But the question is, can external users, people who are not working for the same company, get access to the models that are on the model manager? Or let's say me as a modeler that works for company X, can I, with permission, give access to somebody who is a contractor or somebody who works with us outside of our organization?
Thank you. That's a great question. So because this model manager is installed on any device or location that you want it, just sort of reiterating from the webinar, it could be on premises or through a cloud provider of your choice, such as AWS, GCP, or Azure. And with that choice, you have complete control of the environment, and that includes the network that this environment lives in as well. So in terms of who can even connect to the server, your administrators are configuring that access, whether it be denying specific IPs, or maybe you give access to a VPN to connect to it. And even on top of that, for user authentication, you could also utilize LDAP or Active Directory to give user permission. So not just network permission to be able to connect to it, but even login permission as well.
Yes. So, but just to clarify, I think in most cases, LDAP is used for internal teams to manage it internally, but it might be able to kind of keep track of external users as well. Okay. So I think this is the last question, and there might be a couple of other questions that are asked near the end of the webinar, and we hadn't managed to properly add them to the list that I have in front of me. In case that happened, we will make sure to answer them in the follow-up material, but this is the last one. Why would you include the source files when uploading the model? So I think this is about the checkbox that you showed when you were uploading the model, and you had the option to select it or uncheck it. So what is why this option exists?
So with that checkbox, what you're essentially saying is, I want anyone else who has access to this model to be able to download the model source files and open it in their AnyLogic software. Essentially, you can use this model manager as a repository for a model that you and your company is working on.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think I've asked all the questions that we had, and I want to thank Tyler for assembling these questions for us and taking care of all the back-end technical stuff for the webinar. Thank you again, Jeff, for this informative presentation and the webinar. Our time is up for today. Thank you again for joining us. We will have some follow-up webinars to talk more about this ecosystem as a whole, how the model editor and the model manager works together, and talk about a bigger picture of how this enterprise simulation fits into digitalization that is happening in corporate. So we'll have a thorough explanation of ideas there and how our ecosystem can help you with implementing these ideas. But for today, I guess like the follow-up after this webinar would be you get a survey. We really appreciate your feedback. It helps us a lot in tailoring the future webinars to your needs. And as I mentioned several times, if there is any unanswered questions left or anything that we need to share with you, any material that you feel, any link that we feel is going to be useful as a follow-up to this webinar, we'll share it with you via email. The recording of this webinar, including the Q&A section, will be uploaded to our YouTube channel soon, so you have access to that as well. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks.
Thank you.